Hi, gee, it's good to see you back at the Sunday dining room table. You ready to hear what happened to Frank Battelle in the little town in the Kansas prairie? You got to keep in mind that I wasn't really there, I heard Frank tell this story many times at my Aunt Betty's Sunday table. And I read Dennis Smirl's book, Murder at the Liberty Ballroom. You can read that too. Just pick up a copy from Amazon. Now, before I go on, though, I want to share something with you that I just found out about. I know you wouldn't be here if you weren't looking for good podcast stories. So that's why I've got to tell you about Jared King TV on YouTube. Great stories, all told by a fellow who is so warm, so genuine, and so filled with tales of folks who live in the Appalachian Mountains, legends, personal stories about when he was a kid there, just stories about real people without any pretense or any bull. I don't know Jared King. I've never met him, but he has become my new hero, and boy, such an inspiration. So when you leave here, why don't you just drop in on him and hear for yourself what I'm talking about, because I think you're going to take a real liking to him. That's Jared, Jared, King TV on YouTube. Okay, back to our own story now. Now, Frank Battelle, as you remember, is a psychic detective, but let's recap what we know about the plot so far. We know that Audrey Hilliard was a movie star who decided to return to her old hometown to retire. But the very day she gets to the old hometown, she's murdered. She hadn't been back in over 40 years. So what is going on? At the end of episode 2, Frank has met an old farm lady who knows just about all of the characters involved in this mystery, and she has her own ideas about the murder at the Liberty Ballroom.
I'll tell you what happened. Tony's polite. He's always polite. So I know he wouldn't have been rude when he reminded her how they was dance partners at the ballroom all them years ago. And you know what she said to him? She said, real huffy-like, I had so many dance partners I couldn't possibly remember them all. Dismissed him just like that. Cut Tony to the quick. Not just 'cause she didn't remember him, but the mean way she said it. She brushed him off like a cookie crumb. There's no need in that kind of ugliness. None at all.
Well, sounds like he got over it, though, Frank said. He let her into the ballroom just a few hours later. And Connie shot right back, he did not. And Frank said, well, then how'd she get in?
Well, bigger question to me is why did she get in? What was she doing there anyway? Wasn't like a killer was hanging around that old place, waiting to knock somebody off. There's a lot of questions that need answering if you ask me.
Murder at the Liberty Ballroom.
Episode 3.
Well, by the time Frank left Connie, she had asked him to call her by her first name, and she'd also directed him to the town where Janet had moved a couple of years back. Pioneer Village, it was called. Well, pretty soon, Frank was back on County Road 120, and from there he went on over to the secondary highway that had probably been the main thoroughfare before the interstate came through. A glance at the clock on his dashboard reminded him that he hadn't had anything to eat but one bagel since 8:30 that morning. So he was looking for signs of some sort of commerce, and he found it along the route he was taking, but most of them were rusted out and boarded over. And then on up ahead, on the far side of an empty field, he saw a service station, you know, that old-fashioned kind with 2 pumps. Well, there's a sign on the roof that said, "Gas and eat." Not very inviting. Then a handwritten sign in the window read, "Historic mining pit out back. Illegal to swim." Well, I remember Frank telling us that he went inside, he got himself a bottle of apple juice and a slice of pepperoni pizza, and then he took it with him out to the mining pit out back. He figured if it's a historical place, it's probably got a bench out there and maybe some sort of a marker. And that's just what he found. So he sits down. He said really it wasn't the historical marker and it wasn't the bench that drew him. It was the shade of that 60-foot oak. He said that he was absolutely roasting, and he got that apple juice bottle wiped out in about one gulp. Anyway, he was sitting there on that sagging bench, moaning and groaning because it was so blasted hot. And he thought, looking at the mining pit, it really was okay that it was illegal to swim. It wasn't all that inviting. It had dark, stagnant water in it. And there was a mound of stone beside it, and he could read what was chiseled on it. It said, "Zinc mine, collapsed 1926, killed 14 men." Well, obviously the guy who wrote that was a man of few words. Anyway, he polished off the pizza. I can just visualize him, can't you? He sat back to wipe his forehead with a paper napkin. Then he said he closed his eyes against that intense heat. What he was trying to do was just find the energy to call his Tucson office and see if he had any messages. Well, now I remember from past times he told us about that office. That's a pretty generous word for a closet with a desk and a chair and an old-fashioned answering machine. He said he used to have somebody who took care of the phone when he was away, but it was a girl and they dated, and then they had a fight. So in one afternoon, he lost a girlfriend and all of his hired help. So here he is now on this bench, and he stretched his legs out, he said, and he crossed his ankles and just trying to relax. But in that moment, in that very moment, a shiver ran through his body that felt as if he'd been struck by a bolt of lightning. Well, his eyes sprang open. He was fully alert now. He sat up and he snapped his head to the left and he snapped his head to the right, trying to determine where his sense of danger was coming from. He said he had no more than a 10-second warning when he heard the crack of a shotgun fired in his direction. Well, he jumped up and he took cover behind that great big tree as another shot rang out. He's behind the tree now, and he could feel it. He could feel eyes focused on him, but whose eyes? He had no idea. And then it was with a sudden paralyzing realization that he knew beyond a doubt that shotgun was pointed at his chest. And Frank said he could smell his own fear as he waited for that quick, sharp impact that would end his life. Ah, the gift. Now that gift, it was fully engaged, and it had warned him. But now wait a minute. Something else was happening. It was letting him know. Gosh, what was it? Not sure what's happening, he said. It was like he could envision a finger slipping from the trigger. Like there was a change of mind. Sadness even, as the unseen sniper slipped deeper into a stand of oak and redwood half a football field away. Well, Frank said he grabbed that juice bottle and he jogged back to the car. As he crossed over to where he parked out front, he saw a guy who looked like a farmhand maybe, taking a gas hose from the tank on his dented truck. And so Frank called out to him, Hey, did you hear a shotgun blast just now? But the guy, he just gave him a sort of lazy glance. Hear him all the time, he drawled. Wild turkey? Jackrabbit? I don't know, just some guy trying to get himself some supper. And with that, he got in his truck and he rumbled away. Well, when Frank told us about this at my aunt's dining room table, he said, if there was anybody who was going to ask me how my day was going right then, you know what I would have said? I would have said, fine. My day's going just fine. I see a skeleton in my mind, and I know it's the key to this whole mess, but I don't have a clue how it all comes together. Then I meet two men who are supposed to be helping me to help them, and they're both hiding secrets. And now I'm the target practice for somebody with a conscience. Well, how's your day going? Frank found Pioneer Village. It was right where Connie said it would be, and in the condition that she told him it would be in. You know, like so many other little towns across the country, this one, as he described it, had choked on its own dust. But he could imagine it with people on its sidewalks, with old brick buildings open for business, the bank, the feed store, the cafe. Now, Connie, she had said to watch for a little white church with a bell tower and to make a left at the next street after that. Well, surprisingly enough, Frank said that block after block boasted neat houses with well-tended yards and new cars here and there, nice older ones too. And he wondered, where in the world did these folks work? They surely commute to some metropolis that pays them a decent wage. After all, he knew they weren't all retired from the number of tricycles and bikes he saw on the porches and in the yards. Anyway, a quarter of a mile from the church turnoff, he saw a sprawling medical complex that it looked relatively new. Connie hadn't mentioned that, but Frank sort of suspected it was what prompted Janet to move to this little place, you know, to be near the medical facility. The GPS on his rental car let him know that at that moment he was less than 2 miles from his destination. Frank used those 2 miles to collect himself and his thoughts. Who shot at him back at the service station? Or was it like the old-timer said, just a guy trying to bring home his dinner? He took a deep breath and he forced himself to concentrate on what lay ahead. Well, Connie sure got one thing right. Janet Dennison was a tiny little thing. It was hard for Frank to believe that this was the same woman he saw in his vision at the ballroom and in the school yearbook. Her immaculate little cottage was definitely built for one. In fact, he could see the entire interior just standing in the living room. Knowing that he was on his way, Connie had called her. Janet had prepared a pitcher of iced tea, so she offered him a glass, which he gratefully accepted. And she seemed genuinely sweet, he said. When she smiled, a glimpse of the 18-year-old revealed itself. And she said to Frank, "So Connie says you're helping the sheriff find Audrey's killer." Frank said he was doing his best. And then she wanted to know what she could do for him. So Frank told her the truth. He wasn't sure. Maybe fill in some gaps. Janet confessed that she didn't go into town much anymore, so she really wasn't sure. That's when Frank interrupted her and he said, I can't help but notice all the framed pictures of Sheriff Crane in the room. The two of you taken what? It looks like you might have been in high school." "High school, yes, 1976. And I'm especially fond of that picture of us." And she was pointing to a picture by the window. And she said that had been taken a year before, the one that they were talking about. Then she said, one on my parents' front porch, the other out at the lake. Oh, Willard, he loved to water ski. We're both pretty good at it, you know. The picture on the piano, that was taken more recently, actually just a couple of months ago. So Frank said, but he never married. And Janet said no. And then Frank said, and you never married. And Janet said no. But then Frank said, and yet it looks as if you two have stayed pretty close through the years. Then Janet said very wisely, the blink of a camera shutter doesn't tell the whole story. You know that, Mr. Patel. Frank wanted to know then what happened between the blanks. And that's when Janet confided that the sheriff was once engaged to Audrey. Now, the gift had let him down before, but this was unbelievable. He'd had no inkling the sheriff had a relationship with Audrey that had been that serious. And Janet said, you know, one day he was talking marriage to me, and the next, he was engaged to Audrey. So Frank said, aha, so that's when you and Audrey got into a showdown at the ballroom. Janet said that's when I told her I would get even with her if it took the rest of my life. Well, Frank, made light of it. He said, oh, girls say things like that to one another when they're, and Janet interrupted. She said, oh, no, I meant it. And Frank said, yes, but he didn't marry her. I mean, it looks like he's still very much with you. It's still very much Willard and Janet. Janet got quietly emotional when she said, oh, he didn't marry her, but not because he didn't want to.
Audrey always said she was going to be a movie star, and nobody doubted her. But it cost money to move out of state. Money for the kind of acting classes she insisted she needed to take in Hollywood. Well, jobs are hard to come by for a 19-year-old back then. So Willard did what a lot of men were doing in the 70s. He went to work as a junior pipeline mechanic in Anchorage, Alaska.
Frank remembered hearing about the pipeline and the number of young men who went directly from high school to Alaska because they could certainly earn a lot more money there than they could make at home.
He sent her almost every cent he earned, and she went to Hollywood just like she said she was going to do. The money Willard thought was being put aside for their life together, over and above her living necessities and acting classes, he later found was used to buy the wardrobe she needed to attract men she wanted to impress at the studios. 3 years later, when Willard's contract ended, he flew from Anchorage to Los Angeles International Airport. But she wasn't there to meet him. No, he spent weeks looking for her. She'd have him send his checks to a post office box, saying she stayed with girlfriends to save money and never knew where she'd be from week to week. Eventually, he learned that she had signed with a major studio and was engaged to one of their executives. Willard came home a bitter and broken man. Worse yet, his mom died while he was away.
But you were waiting for him, weren't you? Frank said.
He was too angry to notice. I think he became a policeman to work out some of his fury. Bad guys had to pay. He made that his personal mantra.
Frank didn't understand why he wasn't getting paranormal confirmation that at least some of what she was saying was true. Instead, he got nothing.
It wasn't until I was diagnosed with cancer that he came back to me. And even then, it wasn't right away. But the past few months have been as if the terrible part never happened. He's worked so hard to make it up to me, but he didn't have to. I understood. I always understood. Audrey had a way of putting men under her spell. She broke up so many relationships, So many marriages. It's just the way she was.
Frank wanted to know how long Sheriff Crane had been aware that she was coming back.
Oh, let me think. Well, it was the mayor and the city council who dreamed up the idea of creating an Audrey Hilliard Day. They actually talked about it for a year, maybe more, ever since they heard she was leaving politics. Oh, she was offered some awfully generous incentives, like the most infamous building in town being renovated and named for her.
That's when he knew it was time to ask the hard questions. And so he asked her, "Do you think there's any possibility the sheriff killed Audrey?"
No, our happiness is stronger than his past resentment. He's let it go.
Well, Frank started to say yes, but he had months to plan, but he didn't get the sentence finished.
He didn't know when she was coming back. The fact she decided to come in 2 days ahead of schedule was news to Willard until the day before her arrival. And then he was only told because the mayor, who'd arranged her accommodations and travel, felt she needed security. He knows nothing of their past relationship. There was no reason to talk to Willard about Audrey other than about her security needs.
Well, Frank had to ask, so he said, "Do you have any ideas of why she would have gone to the ballroom on the evening she was murdered?"
Because I called her at the hotel and asked her to meet me there. I told her I wanted to meet her where it all began. If she was coming home, I wanted to assure her that bygones were bygones.
Frank was skeptical. He said, "And you got inside how?"
With a key, of course, which anyone can make. Oh, really? It's so simple a child could do it. All I had to do was go into town on the pretext of seeing my doctor, park out back of the ballroom near the woods that run behind the property, run marking pin on the skeleton key, put it in the old block, jiggle it around a bit, then pull it out. Color from the marking pin will come off where the pins inside the lock make contact. The uncolored portions are easily filed down with a common metal file. I used an old fingernail file.
Frank couldn't understand why bells weren't going off in his mind. Were the words skeleton and key about the key that Janet made?
You look shocked. I'm surprised you're not here just to confirm what you already knew, or at least suspected.
Well, Frank was shocked. He was shocked when he said, "So you're telling me that you killed Audrey Hilliard?"
I'm making a confession. Yes.
You've been listening to Murder at the Liberty Ballroom.
So you really think that Janet did it? Do you? I don't know. There's still Tony, you know. He got his feelings hurt and he had a crush all those years. And there's Willard. And now there's the librarian. And not maybe she wouldn't do it for herself, but what about for her mother? I'm not so sure about Janet. Well, anyway, we've only got one more little bit to this story. And I think you're going to be surprised. I think. I really thank you for sitting around with me on a Sunday or whatever day it is where you are. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for subscribing. Just thank you for being here. You make everything just worthwhile. Really appreciate it. You know that voice you hear, that deep, wonderful voice you hear at the beginning and end, that's Jack Diamond. And Jack's not at our Sunday table right now because he's a little under the weather. Might need some prayers going out for Jack Diamond. He's been my friend for many years. He's been with us ever since we first started. So, good guy. I also want to tell you who played what parts. This all started, with Dennis Smirl's book. And then he let me do an adaptation, and then I ended up just telling you about it. But Connie That's played by Nicole Aloni. And I think she's just fantastic. And then, of course, Sheriff Crane, Mark Schwartz, and Janet. Janet is played by Dawn Vesco. I want to thank everybody for that. The music, that wonderful music that makes up the score. That's a gift from Fesliyan Studios. David Fesliyan and all of the guys that are with him that are so talented. If you ever need music, go to Fesliyan Studios. They've got everything under the sun, and it's yours for free. So have a wonderful time with their music. The sound effects, those all came from Free Sound. That was free too. So again, thank you so much for being around. Next Sunday, if all goes well, we're going to have the ending to Murder at the Liberty Ballroom. Then we've got some other mysteries for you. So come back, be our guest, have a cup of coffee, fix yourself a piece of pie, and sit back. And just let all those crazy people that are doing all those horrible things in this world, leave them to it. We'll just sit here together and enjoy each other's company. Till next time, God bless.